In the depths of Yakutia lay hidden one of the Soviet Union's biggest secrets, an incredible supply of diamonds capable of changing the course of history. But why did these treasures remain classified as top secret? How did the state secret of giant diamond deposits become a key to international politics, and soon turned into a tool of corruption and betrayal? In this video, we will reveal shocking facts, vanished diamonds, hidden deals, and international manipulations that led to one of the most mysterious losses of the 20th century. Watch until the end to find out who really took the Soviet diamonds and how it changed the world. For decades, the depths of the Soviet Union harbored a secret whose value could eclipse even the official gold reserve. It concerns one of the world's largest diamond reserves, a strategic treasure shrouded in such a thick veil of secrecy that even the highest officials of the Union republics had no idea of its true scale. How did the superpower accumulate this immense wealth, and why did it hide it so desperately? The answers lie in the cold earth of Yakutia, in the intricacies of closed schemes, and in the state policy of total control. Yakutia became the main source of diamond power. It was there in the permafrost far from prying eyes that giant kimberlite pipes, real natural storehouses, were found. Up to 90% of all Soviet diamonds came from this harsh, inaccessible land. But what is remarkable is that information about the real volume of production was classified as top secret. No public figures, no reports for the general public, only dry reports for a narrow circle of people in Moscow. However, the Politburo did not seem to think that the Yakut diamonds alone were enough. The USSR, possessing colossal reserves of its own, paradoxically actively purchased stones abroad as well. This was not done for the sake of jewelry for Soviet citizens, but for a much grander purpose. Diamonds were regarded not as jewels, but as an absolute strategic resource. In the event of a deep economic crisis, a full-scale war, or a collapse of the ruble, diamonds could be instantly exchanged for currency, advanced technology, weapons, or food. It was an unofficial safety net for the system, a financial cushion for an entire empire, which in the 70s, according to some estimates, already exceeded the country's gold reserve in value. But it was not enough to simply mine or buy stones. They had to be reliably hidden and protected as the most important asset. Officially, the treasures were under the control of Gokran, the state repository of valuables, a department inherited from Tsarist times, but which became even more closed and mysterious under Soviet rule. Literally only a few people had access to information about its contents. One of the largest diamond reserves was located not on the surface, but deep underground, in secret multi-level bunkers under Moscow. These facilities were not marked on any public map. Concrete walls several meters thick, massive steel doors capable of withstanding a direct hit, and a security system comparable to a military base. All of this was supposed to withstand even a nuclear strike. The repositories were under the jurisdiction of several structures at once: Gokran, the Ministry of Finance, and, partially, the Committee for State Security. Every access to the cells was meticulously recorded in journals, which were kept manually and destroyed immediately after reconciliation. However, the treasures did not just lie dormant, waiting for a rainy day. They were a powerful instrument of influence, a silent weapon of secret diplomacy. Money is easy to track through banks and transactions. Diamonds are virtually impossible. They could be carried in a pocket without documents, exchanged without a trace, stored for decades without fear of inflation. It was precious stones that became a universal way to resolve delicate issues on the international stage. Such schemes were particularly actively used in the 70s and 80s, when the USSR sought to strengthen its influence in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Instead of official deals, bloodless gifts were practiced. According to journalistic investigations, in 1984 alone, Moscow transferred about 25,000 carats of diamonds to allied African regimes to guarantee their loyalty and the necessary votes at international negotiations. But this powerful system only worked as long as the empire itself was strong. In the late 80s, the Soviet Union began to crack at the seams. The economy was collapsing, the central government was weakening, and control over state reserves began to gradually be lost. It was at this point that the most mysterious disappearance of valuables in the history of the country began. Diamonds began to disappear from the Gokran repositories, a lot silently, without a trace. While public attention was focused on rallies, the first elections, and the struggle for power, more than 200,000 carats of selected diamonds vanished from the country's main storage facility in just a few months before the official collapse of the USSR in 1991. The loss was recorded, but no one was punished. Investigations were either not conducted at all, or their materials were destroyed, or are still classified. Everything happened under the guise of reorganization of departments or a planned inventory of property. Documents were drawn up retroactively, keys to the cells were received by temporarily authorized persons, and the repositories themselves were opened at night. A managed chaos reigned, which was virtuously used by those who knew where and what lay. In December 91, when the Union had virtually ceased to exist, several aircraft with diplomatic status flew from Moscow to London and Geneva. No one had the right to inspect such flights. What was on board, documents, safes, or inconspicuous boxes, remained a mystery. But later it was in these cities that private firms and foundations associated with former Soviet officials and people from the special services began to appear. The old rules collapsed, and in the new reality, everyone saved themselves. Someone took money, someone took gold, and the most far-sighted took stones that are easy to sell, difficult to track, and impossible to return. According to experts, the missing 200,000 carats could have cost up to $1.5 billion at that time. It was not just a theft, but a brilliantly organized operation behind which stood people with the highest clearances, connections, and precise knowledge of the system from within. First of all, these are high-level officials who had direct access to Gokran. Some of them were already abroad in the early 90s, where they turned into owners of elite jewelry companies in just a couple of years. They were assisted by intermediaries, lawyers, diplomats, businessmen who оформляли сделки и вывозили камни под видом личного имущества или через дипломатическую почту. One stone the size of a fingernail could cost tens of thousands of dollars. Transporting them was ridiculously easy, especially when the regulatory authorities were paralyzed, and none of these people ever received a real punishment. In 1994, Western analysts raised the alarm. More than 20 tons of precious stones of unknown origin were postupal at world auctions through private firms registered by former citizens of the USSR. The number of diamonds without documents increased sharply in the markets of Western Europe and Asia. Their origin could not be accurately established, but experts made an unambiguous conclusion based on the characteristic features of the cut and purity. The stones were Soviet. Some batches had exact matches with the Gokran catalogs, which mysteriously also ended up abroad. The culmination came in 2000 when one of the largest diamond lots in its history appeared at the famous Sotheby's auction. Later it turned out that the stones were incredibly similar to a batch that disappeared from the USSR in the early 90s, but it was impossible to prove anything. No documents, no statements, no lawsuits. Everything was done through dummy companies registered in offshore zones. While billions were being laundered in the West, in Russia itself, diamonds became a shadow currency for the criminal world. They were used to pay for weapons, real estate abroad, and political influence. Traces of the exported treasures led to two major world hubs of luxury and shadow finance, London and Dubai, where they finally dissolved, changing owners and receiving new, impeccable biographies. Along with anonymous batches, unique specimens, each of which was not just a precious stone, but a part of history, went to the West. Soon, rumors began to circulate in elite circles about the appearance on the black market of the so-called fragments of the empire, diamonds of exceptional purity and old Soviet cut, which carried not only brilliance, but also the shadow of their origin. Imagine a large, perfectly clear diamond weighing 50 carats, with a slight, barely perceptible bluish tint, characteristic of Yakut deposits. Its cut is not modern computer, но выполненная вручную мастером смоленского завода «Кристалл» с чуть более высокой короной и более мелкими гранями павильона, что придавало камню особую, живую игру света. Such a stone, without a certificate in history, suddenly appears in the private collection of a European magnate in the mid-90s. His new owner boasts about it at private receptions, but never puts it up for official auction. He knows that the origin of the stone is a secret that is best not to stir up. Soon, strange things begin to happen to the magnate. His business projects fail one after another. He suffers personal tragedies, and eventually he is forced to secretly sell the stone to cover debts. The new owner, an Arab sheikh, places the diamond in his treasury, but after a few years he is overtaken by a sudden illness, and his family, superstitiously considering the stone cursed, gets rid of it through a chain of intermediaries. Thus, the legend of the Blue Tear of Siberia is born, a stone that brings misfortune to its owners. This is not just fiction. This is the psychological effect of owning stolen goods. Everyone who bought such fragments of the empire understood that they were followed by a trail of state secrets, betrayal, and possibly violence. This knowledge, this fear of exposure itself, became a curse. Investigative journalists and gemologists have been trying for years to compare archival photographs and descriptions from lost Gokran catalogs with the stones that rarely appeared on the market. They noted matches in weight, color, type of inclusions, but without the stone itself for examination, all this remained only a theory. For example, the story of the Black Orlov of the Kremlin, a hypothetical black diamond, which was supposedly part of the KGB's secret collection and used as a symbol of identification for top-level agents. After 1991, it supposedly disappeared, and then a stone similar in description was spotted in Asia. All these stories, real or fictional, served one important function. They created a mythology around the stolen treasures, making them even more desirable to a certain circle of collectors who are chasing not only carats, but also a legend. And most importantly, this mythology helped to finally cover up the traces, turning a real criminal offense into a beautiful but sad tale, where the original owners and perpetrators of the theft are forever hidden in the fog of time. The fate of these unique stones is the fate of the stolen era itself. They lost their name and history, receiving in return only price and curse. While some collectors were chasing after the cursed relics of the fallen empire, and others were counting profits, the world diamond industry itself shuddered from this sudden and uncontrolled flow of treasures. For almost the entire 20th century, this market was not free. It was an empire within empires, and one giant ruled it, the South African company De Beers. Through its subsidiary, the Central Selling Organization, CSO in London, De Beers controlled up to 80 to 90% of all world sales of rough diamonds. Producing countries, including even the Soviet Union, were forced to sign exclusive contracts with the CSO, committing to sell all their diamonds only through it. This allowed De Beers to act as the world's central bank of diamonds. When demand fell, the company bought up surpluses and stockpiled them, preventing prices from collapsing. When demand grew, it smoothly released reserves onto the market. Artificial scarcity maintained the myth of the exclusivity of diamonds and guaranteed consistently high prices. The Soviet Union, being the second largest producer in the world, although an ideological opponent of the West, pragmatically played by the rules of De Beers in the diamond business. It was a symbiosis. The USSR received a steady stream of hard currency, and De Beers retained its monopoly. But in the early 90s, everything collapsed. The collapse of the USSR and the ensuing chaos led to the fact that an uncontrolled flow of diamonds flooded the world market. It was not only those hundreds of thousands of carats stolen from Gokran, but also tons of diamonds that Russian producers and newly minted businessmen began to sell, bypassing the contract with De Beers, desperately needing cash. The main centers of this gray trade became Antwerp, Tel Aviv, and Mumbai. Dealers from these cities bought Russian diamonds at a significant discount, without documents and unnecessary questions. For De Beers, it was a nightmare. Their centuries-old system of control cracked. Prices for small and medium-sized diamonds, which formed the basis of Russian exports, began to fall rapidly. In 1993, 1995, the fall in prices for some categories reached 25%. The monopoly faltered. De Beers tried to fight. The company spent hundreds of millions of dollars buying up extra Russian diamonds on the open market to keep prices up. But the flow was too great. It was like trying to scoop the ocean with a bucket. As a result, the corporation had to take unprecedented measures. It itself was forced to reduce purchases from other producers, and for the first time in many years showed a decrease in profits. The blow was dealt not only to finances, but also to reputation. The whole world saw that the king was naked and his power was not absolute. It was this chaos, provoked by the collapse of the USSR, that became one of the catalysts that eventually led to the creation of the Kimberley process in 2003, an international certification system designed to cut off conflict diamonds from the market, or blood diamonds. The irony is that Soviet diamonds, stolen not during a war, but through a quiet behind-the-scenes looting, turned out to be just as dirty and dealt a blow to market stability comparable to the consequences of African civil wars. They broke the old order and showed that even the hardest stones in the world can become instruments of destruction in the hands of people devoid of conscience. We are talking about billions of dollars, geopolitics, and market wars, but behind the cold brilliance of each diamond and the dry figures of stock market reports lies a story written not in offices, but in the permafrost, a story of human labor pushed to the limit. The price of this wealth for those who mined it was incredibly high. The diamond rush in Yakutia, which began in the mid-1950s, was not a romantic adventure of lone prospectors, but a rigidly planned state campaign. Thousands of geologists, engineers, builders, and workers from all over the Soviet Union were thrown into the impassable taiga, where temperatures dropped to minus 60 degrees in winter. They went for the long ruble, for northern benefits, and for a dream. In place of the legendary kimberlite pipe Mir grew an entire city, Mirny. It was a city of achievement and a city camp at the same time. On the one hand, it was built with unprecedented enthusiasm, creating an oasis of civilization in the middle of the wilderness. On the other hand, life here was subject to a harsh production rhythm. People worked in inhuman conditions, blasting and scooping frozen rock out of a giant funnel that eventually turned into a huge scar on the planet's body, visible even from space. The environmental consequences were monstrous, but in Soviet times it was not customary to talk about it. The Mir mine, more than half a kilometer deep and more than a kilometer in diameter, disrupted the hydrological balance of the region. Pollution of rivers with industrial effluents, degradation of unique northern soils, destruction of traditional reindeer pastures of indigenous peoples, Yakuts and Evenks. All this was the price that the country paid for diamond power. The indigenous peoples themselves, for whom this land had been home for centuries, received practically no benefits from the treasures lying under their feet. Their traditional way of life was mercilessly destroyed by industrialization. When the empire for which all these sacrifices were made collapsed in the 90s, the residents of diamond mining towns faced extremely difficult times. Centralized supply ceased, and the privatization of industrial giants such as Alrosa enriched a narrow circle of new owners in Moscow, but not ordinary workers. People who had devoted their entire lives to hard labor in the north were left alone with a broken economy and harsh nature. Frozen tears of Yakutia are not a metaphor. These are the real destinies of thousands of people whose labor and health paid for the very diamonds that were then so easily and cynically stolen and taken out of the country. The diamond brilliance that dazzled the world concealed a dark history of human resilience, state calculation, and ultimately, great injustice. The history of Soviet diamonds is not just a detective story about the robbery of the century. It is a mirror that reflects the entire tragedy of the collapse of the empire, a state secret that became a weapon, chaos that spawned theft, and treasures that turned to dust for the country, but became the foundation of wealth for a few. And to this day, somewhere in the impeccably guarded vaults of London, Dubai, and Geneva, lie stones that silently hold the main secret of the demise of the Soviet Union.